morning.
Good morning.
Please feel free to move your seat a little bit. I can tell when we're saying names, some people I can't see your face, which means you probably can't see my face, which it's up to you. So this past month and a half or so in these Sunday morning talks, I've been trying to present a way to study a shift or to make a shift in the way that we're seeing, which then is also related to the way that we act or the way that we are. And so this shift in how we are experiencing leads to a shift in how we do things, what's our attitude, what's our approach to living. And this is a very ancient teaching within Mahayana Buddhism called the Six Perfections. Oftentimes that's the translation, or the Six Paramitas. Paramita can also mean crossing over. I've come this past month and a half to kind of like to call them liberations. So that's what crossing over means, is to be liberated from. So these six liberations or six perfections or six crossing overs, these paramitas, one of the oldest teachings in Buddhism, and certainly within Mahayana Buddhism. In this dynamic of studying how it is that we're experiencing things, we oftentimes refer to as a study of wisdom. And we talk about how we're acting or how we are in the world as a study of compassion. And studying is like seeing, compassion is like touching. And in these teachings, really the important thing is the two can't be divided. The Buddha Shakyamuni compared the path to the flight of birds often in many different places. And it has a lot of different meanings. But one of the meanings is a bird has two wings. And the one wing is wing of wisdom, one is the wing of compassion. And you can't get anywhere without both of them. You could see if it was like two legs, well, you can hop on one leg, right? But you can't fly without those two wings. It won't work at all. So I think this is really important for us to remember. It's also very practical, that we can lean into one side or the other, but we really won't be able to make much progress on the path if we don't pay attention to both of those. So for example, we can do our best to behave well, to do the things that we believe we're supposed to be doing, and that's great, but it won't really lead to liberation if it doesn't also change the way that we think about the world, the way that we perceive the world. And vice versa. We can do a lot of study about our perspective or how it is that we're experiencing things. But if that's not reflected in how we act, our attitude, our behavior, our approach, then it gets dry very quickly. So always paying attention to this wisdom and compassion is really fundamental to the way. Now within these six perfections, which are generosity, ethics, forbearance, vigor, meditation, and wisdom. The sixth, wisdom, is the wisdom side. The other five are the compassion side, or the action side. And so within this teaching, we see those two sides appearing. And what I've been emphasizing is that on the wisdom side, we can study how it is that we're seeing things. Primarily the way we see things or experience things is I'm the subject and the thing I'm experiencing is the object. And that in Buddhism has a very clear label. It's called delusion. Right? That you think that you are the actor, you are the center of things, and everything you're experiencing is the object of your subjectivity. But it's very natural for us to experience things in that way. Natural is also deluded. Sometimes we love natural, right? So we're like, well, it's natural. It's like, yeah, it's natural and deluded. And in this case, what we say delusion means is it produces suffering. It produces less spiritual flourishing and actually just regular old human flourishing to approach things in that way. And so trying to use some of these teachings of wisdom to try to see in a different way, to see clearly, or to begin to understand that whatever we're experiencing is an opportunity to know illumination very directly. And this word illumination shows up a lot of places in many spiritual teachings, but in Buddhism, and Buddhism's no exception. We say that prajna paramita is a fountain of light. That's one of her epitaphs, or a way that she's described. A fountain of light. An ever-flowing fountain of incomparable light, actually. Yeah. So that luminosity is not something that exists apart from the world, but that the luminosity is right there within the mundane experiences that we're having all the time. We don't need to get rid of those kind of mundane experiences to experience the light. It's not a game of getting rid of day-to-day life to be able to experience the divine, but it's right there in the actuality of living. There is this illumination, and that's why we say illuminated seeing. Avalokitesvara Bodhisattva, when greatly practicing prajna paramita, the wisdom liberation, clearly saw. That clear seeing is illuminated seeing, seeing with illumination, or seeing illumination. So we've been studying that through the first several liberations or paramitas, and last week we made our way to virya, or vigor, and then we had the lightning last night to help us remind us of that. I just love lightning and thunder, and my grandson's really afraid of it. And I was thinking about that a lot. Like, I think one of the reasons I like thunder is because I'm afraid of it. It's like, I mean, I don't mean the little one that's far in the distance, and you're like, nah, you're like, oh, it's so, the gods are dancing. I mean the one where you like you feel it in your gut, and you go, oh no, a little bit. That kind of oh no feeling that's there. There's something about our weakness in the face of the natural world, which is difficult, but also to me is a kind of inspiring. Maybe I'll say a little bit more about that later. But in studying this vigor, one of the things I was saying last week, and I really like to emphasize, is the straightforwardness of just making effort or showing up with spunk. You know, you can just do that. It's cultivatable. Your spunkiness is not just something that you received or didn't receive. You know, when you get up in the morning, you may feel a certain way, right? But what attitude you bring to how you're going to carry out the day is also about your choice. Now, everyone's different, their energy level, all sorts of things are different. But this kind of vigor that I'm talking about is not really measured in what kind of a brute are you, you know. Some people wake up. I have a good friend who wakes up very early in the morning. She's so annoying if you're with her in the morning. She's, you know, like from very early. I have to go sit quietly for a couple hours, you know. Like that's I think maybe that's why monk life suits me. But she's just right from the beginning. She's always that way. So I'm not saying that this vigor means that you need to be that way, or that you can just choose how you're feeling. But there is an attitude which is cultivatable. You know, if that's even a word. Right? It's not just a feeling that comes to you, but a posture or an attitude that you take. You say, okay, I'll take it on. I was talking with my dad earlier this week. My parents bought a house down here. I'm really happy about that. They live in Salem, where I grew up, and they're in their 80s now, and want them to be closer, so they purchased a house here, and we're getting the house fixed. And my dad's been having a really big problem with his knee, and the doctor looked at it, and the doctor was like, yeah, you probably shouldn't move that or stand on it or do it. There's like pretty much no knee there, and so this isn't good. But my dad, and so I was trying to get my dad to like not. I was like, Dad, just, you know, yeah, you can come down if you want to, but I can take care of this, I can take care of that. And I was like, I want you to take care of your knee. Like think, like, can I do this or can I not do that? And he was like, Patrick, I don't know if I know how to do that. It was like, if I woke up every morning and said, do I feel like I can do the stuff I need to do? I don't know that I would do anything. And there's a problem in that. You know, I'm trying to get him to like take care of his knee. But in the other sense, I really felt this kind of strength of character he has, which is that it's not just about how I feel, it's also about what I decide. It's also about how I decide to show up. So that's one side of vigor, and I think a really fundamental one that's important. And maybe we're a little shy about emphasizing it sometimes because there's so many problems that can quickly arise from that attitude, right? If you ever were in any sport where you had a coach that was a little bit over enthusiastic, you might know about these problems. At many other places you could learn them, but that's one of the places, like, just suck it up, yeah, and that works. Oftentimes that works, actually. But some of the problems that are inside of it are we quickly confuse domination and force for an energetic attitude. Now, domination and force requires a lot of energy, but that's one of the places we very quickly just ride over the top of things, and we are not really receptive to what is fully present and alive. We just go over top of it, and that becomes our way of relating. It's a very subject-object stuck way of relating, and oftentimes when we're trying to be very spunky, we might just do that with ourselves, right? We just ride roughshod over top of whatever's happening with our physical body, our spiritual body, our emotional body, our psychological body, all of those different parts of ourselves. It's very easy. So that's one of the places that we kind of make a big problem. Another place is that we're in this culture where there's no breaks. If you've decided that you are now gods, I could understand why there would never be any breaks. And I kind of think that's what we've decided. We could take that theological discussion somewhere else sometime. If you're interested, grab me afterwards for coffee. But I think basically we've taken all the brakes off, right? And that idea that there is only improvement, only advancement, only, going, we're really suffering from that now. And I don't know hardly anyone who really feels a kind of basic contentment in their life. And this is of course related to technological things, but it's not just about technological things. It's a whole kind of posture. And so one of these things when we're studying vigor we need to be careful of is we need to be careful about this dominating type spirit that can come into that energetic attitude really easily. But we also need to really pay attention to the way in which the more is how progress is defined, or it's sort of naturally what I think I should be doing. And that the solution to a problem is to do more, right? Get the app that helps you lose weight, or meditate, or whatever else you want. I mean, there's an app for everything now, right? Do more, get this course, do this thing. And if you do those things, that's gonna get you there. Start meditating, come to a temple. All of these can be ways in which it's just about an addition. And I think many of us are right at the brink of what, not like we can't really add much more. Not everyone, but I would say that overall as a culture, that's where many of us are. So part of the point that I'm trying to make in this is if we try to do vigor in that outwardly turned way, where I'm the subject and I'm turning outward to engage objects, that's a bottomless pit. That will suck out all of your energy. You won't have a kind of vigor which is sustainable, right? Because it's only flowing in one direction, and we're so caught up in that way of relating with things that our energy might be putting out a lot of energy, but it might just be going in this place where there's nothing that's coming back to sustain me, and that's a problem. That kind of vigor doesn't really get us very far on the path. It's not very wise. So this morning I'd like to talk a little bit about receptivity. Oftentimes inside of the liberations, there's something which is a little bit counterintuitive. When we think about vigor, we usually think, yeah, go, do it. But actually, to have the strength, what allows that go do it is to receive something, or it's actually to receive many things. It is to be receptive. And in that receptivity, that's where the energy comes from. Now we can find this in the earlier paramitas that we were studying. In generosity, for example, the first paramita, I was trying to emphasize really the receptive quality of generosity is gratitude. You see how that works? Like when you realize, oh, my life is given to me, not just by being born by my mother, but all of the things that I receive, moment to moment, day to day, to be able to keep this life going. That's a practice of generosity, is receiving the generosity. And the receptivity, in this case we call gratitude, we realize, oh, I'm in a constant place of receiving offerings for this life to be possible. And in that place, the way in which we may offer something to another being is a little different than, oh, I got my shit together, I've got all my stuff, I have plenty of money now, and I have all these resources, and so I actually give to these, people who have less. That's where you are, sweet, do that, okay? That's not bad. It's just not very liberating. It just reinforces a certain kind of mindset. Now, the nice thing about a wholesome action like that, even if it's not based in a lot of wisdom, it will lead you to wisdom, right? So that's why in Buddhism, we don't actually say that's a bad thing, right? Like the Buddhist history is full of this, the ruler that just has massive resources, right? And the Buddha is not like, massive resources, you need to get rid of those first, right? Or this king or ruler or something will come and want to build a monastery or something. The ancestors don't go, oh, no, don't do that. They say, yeah, please, make the gift. Even knowing that their attitude about it is a little bit off. Like they think they're going to get to heaven quicker if they do that or something. But the really sharp teachers always bring in something like, oh, you're not going to get to heaven any quicker. But this might help you find a liberation. It might help you find liberation. So that's generosity, receptivity. In ethics, I was really emphasizing stopping. The reason for stopping is so you can be receptive. You can be receptive to the situation. When you feel like you're doing something it's not quite in a line, you could get very theoretical about it. You could beat yourself, but just stop. And I was saying that in that stopping, it's like a dam, and the river behind the dam will start to grow, and now you can actually feel what's going on rather than just acting out whatever is the activity. That's not all ethics is, but I was emphasizing that side, so kind of receptivity. In forbearance, I was really emphasizing knowing suffering. That we have to learn to really be intimate with the difficulty of being alive. There is a suffering that's right at very, very fundamental level of living. And as we become intimate with it, it's connected to, it doesn't obstruct joy, happiness, fulfillment, or those things. That actually to know it is what allows us to not be obstructed by it. Right? But if you're not receptive in a situation, you can't really know. You're just sort of putting up with something that's difficult. You're kind of pushing against something that you have to bear. But really, you need to come down and realize, oh, the whole thing is marked by something pretty difficult. And here's a flavor of it in which I can receive, because I know something about that suffering in the deeper chambers of my being. So when we come to vigor, the same thing is true. There's a kind of receptivity that is necessary for the vigor or the attitude about enthusiasm that makes it more of a liberation rather than a just trying hard. So we don't want to just extend our subjective self, out to the objects of our endeavor. We want to receive something in the same movement. So this week I had this very strange dream, and it wasn't a dream with a story or anything. It was a dream about circles. And it was really important, actually, something I had been thinking about a little bit. And I love how dreams do this. They might just, give you an image of something that is important. And in this dream, I was very interested in circles and maybe even rings. Maybe it's because I saw the commercial for the new Rings of Power thing that's coming out or something like that. Right? Tolkien was a real genius here, about the one ring that rules them all, kind of mythology and everything. But in this dream, I just, sometimes I have these dreams that are like waves. Like it just keeps, the same thing just keeps happening again. It's just a wave of the same thing again. Not slightly different, like if you're by the ocean. In this one, it was drawing a circle or picking up a circle. And every time I saw the circle, I was thinking, this circle is a circle that is ungraspable, that includes everything. Pretty cool. As a feeling, as a kind of a little experience. But the reason I bring it up here is because the kind of receptivity that happens when we can see there's something to do. I'm going to call that the circle that could be seen, the ring that I might pick up, or the circle that I might draw. Right? That in doing that, the receptivity is in staying open to the wholeness that is appearing there as that specific circle that you're drawing, or that particular ring that you're picking up. Now, this is something Sauron didn't understand. But he just wanted to control everything, right? So this is the approach. It's not that we don't put ourselves vigorously into an identifiable thing, a particular circle, but while we're doing it, we want to understand or admit or actively stay open to the everythingness of that particular thing that we're doing. So, we're not just kicking the soccer ball, that's a soccer ball that my foot is kicking. Actually, in kicking that soccer ball, there's a whole worlds, in fact, that are appearing in that moment of kicking the soccer ball. And that can sound very abstract, but in the practice of it, there's something which is not abstract at all. And it's completely different, the way that our effort moves forward. So I want to use the discipline of Zazen as an example. I know most of you have probably never struggled with trying to keep a schedule of Zazen going before. But there are those people who have that struggle. And it's a natural thing. I mean, in our tradition, we usually will give the advice. We're a meditation school. And so the teaching is not everybody who's to learn from this school should practice tons and tons and tons of meditation. That's not the teaching. But the teaching is usually, or oftentimes, is centered around there also being some experience of meditation, which in this tradition we call Zazen. Okay? So if you come to a temple that's in the Zen tradition, you'll sit some Zazen, like we did this morning, for 20 minutes or so before, after we did the chanting. Or if you came to the earlier sit, we sit for 40 minutes. On a daily basis, there's lots of Zazen. Not right now because it's August, but once September comes, lots of Zazen happening every day you can participate in. And there's a recommendation to take up some meditation in your life. Whether that's sitting quietly for 2 or 3 minutes each day, or that's sitting several periods of Zazen, that's not the point, but the point is to engage it in some way. And no matter, this was interesting to me, in some ways the more rigorous schedules are easier. The rigorous meaning like the more amount of time. In some ways, the less amount of time that you're spending, in some ways is harder, because the way that you aim yourself in the discipline calls the bluff on macho Zen. So if you're going to sit 3 periods a day, then you can just get the thing all wound up and then like throw yourself in. And you can feel that all. It's really obvious, right? You're probably doing some pretty clear dominating type things in that process as well. But you can just kind of rev the engine up, right? And then you know you're trying hard because it's a lot of work, right? If you say, I'm just going to sit for 5 minutes a day, or I'm not going to even say how long I'm going to sit. I'm just going to sit for quiet a little bit. You don't have the same rev. Okay? So in some ways, that's easier. But like people who move in as residents at the temple, for example, usually experience, like after a month or so, they're like, wow, I'm kind of wiped out because it takes a lot of energy, to put yourself into that practice. So any way we do it has its own type of difficulty. But regardless, the discipline of Zazen, if we think that Zazen is an object which I can conform myself to, push myself into, gobble up, acquire, etc., then I will use a very awkward force in the way it is that I'm trying to sit Zazen. The discipline is not in forcing myself to sit. That's what it sounds like when you take up the endeavor. I got to get myself to sit. But the real discipline is not getting yourself to sit. The real discipline is in returning to receptivity. It's relying on receptivity. And this is actually why getting yourself to sit on a regular basis is difficult. Because the receptivity goes just in the face of our habit of turning outward to fulfill our immediate kind of desire. I'll have a cup of coffee. Let me check how the campaign's going. That's pretty exciting, isn't it? I find myself checking that every day a whole bunch of times. Like, wow, how's that going? I'm excited about it, right? So, I'll do that, right? There's all kinds of things I can fill the space of receptivity with. It takes nothing to fill that space. All it takes is you turning outward to some object, and then that space of receptivity is filled. So the discipline of Zazen is not how do I force myself onto the cushion. That's relatively easy, actually, compared to the discipline of returning to the receptivity, relying on the receptivity, which is Zazen, and letting that be what guides me in the cushion. Now, I'm saying that is more difficult, actually. So sometimes we need to start with I'm just going to make myself sit, right? And that's actually good. Right? But quickly as you can, turn from just, I'm going to force myself to sit, to this other kind of thing. That actually sitting is the posture of receiving. In a religious sense, we would say it is the posture of receiving the ungraspable body of awakening. We receive the body of the Buddha when we sit in Zazen. It's like a sacrament. For those who feel comfortable with that terminology. For you, if you don't, forget I said that. It's just the Buddha made that completely available to us. And in sitting, we receive it. The technique or the art of Zazen or meditation is not formulated in a way to drive you to an experience. Now, there are types of meditation that are like that. They are articulated to push you towards a certain kind of experience. The Zazen that we practice in this hall isn't that type of meditation. It's a practice of receptivity. So it's not going to drive you to anything. It's formulated to ask you to receive. And in that receptivity, you will experience. You experience your body, you experience your breath, you experience mind and all of its various layers. And it is the receptivity to all of those things which then leads to the capacity for a deeper intimacy with the body of awakening. So, we might ask ourselves, how can we practice this way? And any answer that you could give will be a poison. How do I sit Zazen? Anything anyone could say. It might be good, it might be mostly not poison, but it will contain poison. And the poison will be there because once you have an explanation of how to do it, or you have a technique that's given to you, that will allow a lever to appear in which you can remain the subject, which is leveraging an object in some way. You can utilize the technique to get over something, to get around something, to go where you want to go. When the whole purpose of meditation is not to go where you want to go, is actually to receive, is to be receptive. And for that receptivity to then lead to to movement. So that's not a problem, as long as we just are aware of it. Hakuin Zenji, one of the great revivers of the Zen tradition in Japan, he talked about beating the poison drum. I love that term. Some people are like, what are you doing, Hakuin? He says, I'm beating the poison drum, right? It's like, come on, let's practice. And he was hardcore, very, very energetic practitioner. But he realized there's a poison in it. There's a poison when we think about it as this thing that can ride over top of life or eject us into a different place, rather than knowing that deep receptivity. So it's not a problem that there's a poison. It just recognize that that always has the potential to show up. And even if you don't get an answer to the question how, you will just make up a poison anyway, because that's your nature, right? As a deluded human being. Sorry. The good news is you're also a Buddha. So your nature is also a nature of awakening. And those two are not separate from each other. So we should go ahead and throw ourselves in with whatever technique or whatever how makes sense to us. You know? If you say, for example, I just recognize that I need some spaciousness in my life, that I just always kind of feel filled up. I don't know what to do. And I'm just turning outward constantly. Decide to sit for 15 minutes a day. There's a poison in that. No problem. Just recognize that if you're just kind of beating yourself into shape for those 15 minutes, you're not really doing the practice. So you take up that how. Just get yourself on the cushion or on a chair or whatever it is, whatever the way it is that you sit zazen. Right? Just get yourself there. Push. Make the effort. Shift the attitude. Get up and be like, I don't have to feel like sitting zazen to sit zazen. I look like my dad. If I only sat zazen when I felt like sitting zazen, I'd be in trouble. So we're not waiting to feel like it. We actually just put ourselves in. But then very quickly realize that any kind of dominating force that you've put behind it is not the point. That actually now you're sitting there. Okay, come back to the receptivity. Right? And in the basic foundational teachings that we're here, we talk about that as a posture of the body, posture of the breath, and posture of the mind, which all of you have learned about at some point. Right? So we just practice correctly there. Correctly meaning with that receptivity. And then the paramita, or the perfection, can be a path. It will lead you to the next step and the next step and the next step and the next step. You don't have to get it perfect. It's not the teachings of perfection. Maybe we should say the teachings of perfecting, which there's no arrival. You keep going again. So I'll tell you one last thing. We'll have some time for some questions. My wife and I have this I don't know what you call it. It's not a custom exactly. It's not a habit. What is it? What's the thing we like to do? We like to go see the crawdads. We like to go see the crawdads on Sayuslao River. If you go out towards the coast, before you get to like Mapleton, you can turn up onto the Sayuslao River, and you can go up. You can go all the way, I think, to probably like Lorraine and those sorts of areas along the Sayuslao River there. But the way the water is there, the flow of that river is a little bit warmer. I'm not seeing a lot of crawdads in the Mackenzie, we oftentimes go to the Willamette River up when we go the other direction. Don't see them much there, but for some reason the Sayuslao, I think it's the slower, it's warmer, there's more sediment, there's more logging around there. I don't know if that affects it or not. But anyway, there's lots of crawdads. And so when you go to see the crawdads, when you kind of go out there's a couple places we like to go, and you kind of walk out and you won't see any. Maybe you'll see one or two, the bright red ones, the kind of really robust, very vigorous ones will be out there, doing their crawdad thing. And it's so inspiring. They're so red. And you just think like, what is the purpose of that? other than to get eaten by a blue heron or something, you know. And they're so red and vibrant. Usually we go more in the fall, but we went a couple days ago, and then, but if you hang out there, then pretty soon, all of these red bugs start coming up, and there's this whole life of crawdads, which all of your bumbling around to go see the crawdads will not produce. You actually have to go there. I mean, you could like pick up rocks and try to find them. That's what we did when we were kids, and we didn't ever find very many. You know, we get chicken livers and hang them down in the creek and try to pull them up. But all you have to do there is actually just hang out, be receptive. And then pretty soon, I was sitting watching all the little fish, and I was kind of spacing out. I was closing my eyes, and all the light was kind of dancing in my eyes. Well, my eyes were closed, and that was pretty exciting. And then I opened my eyes, and there was this crawdad on my foot about to pinch me, and I was just gonna let him. You know, I was like, okay, I don't know what this feels like. Let me see how it goes, and I chickened out. And I moved my foot a little bit, and it went away. And then the other thing, we stayed there for a while. There's these little teeny crawdads. They're like this big, and they're very similar color to the rocks. They're not red yet. They're kind of green, maybe a little blue, and then they might have just a little hint of red or orange coming in on the pinchers, for example, you know. And they're so cute, you know, they're just this big. It's very hard to catch. They just go like that, but, you know, we catch a few of them like that and see that. So the reason I like to do things like this is because I live with somebody who's, I just want to say, a better human being than I am. And she remembers those kinds of things, and she just does them naturally. And so she's asking to do that, and we go and do it. But I'm not encouraging you to go see crawdads, although I kind of am encouraging you to go see crawdads. But I want you to go see the crawdad that is your life. I don't know if it's a crawdad or it's something else. But if you put yourself there, which takes some effort, and then you wait a little bit and practice seeing and practice the receptivity, that underlying aliveness, the bright red in this case, it appears. When you step from there, you've got something very different than just trying to dominate the world or dominate yourself with this kind of vigorous quality. And that's where the real strength of practice comes in, that has continuity, which transforms a life, because you come back to that again and again. Those living waters are what animates life, as opposed to your own idea of what you should do. So we have a few minutes for questions or comments or rebuttals.
Hello, son.
Hi.
I'm glad you kind of ended with the talking about domination a little bit, because while you were talking about it earlier, I'm like, God, I'm so sensitive to not just the idea of dominating and being dominated, and it brings up a lot of angst, you know. Just so I'm hyper aware of that, and I feel like it's kind of a problem.
Well, how to work with the awareness, I think, becomes, you know, first is an awareness of it, and everyone's going to have it from a different kind of angle. What their karma with it's going to be different, and so becoming more intimate with that karma is the point. So, like in my case, for example, you know, growing up and learning behaviors of domination, I feel pretty lucky because most of mine were not like on the level of what would be conventionally called abusive. I grew up in a kind of environment where there was plenty of the kind of more subtle domination that I'm talking about here, but there wasn't the more overt one. But I could see, like, you know, example I give a lot is in the way that I would yell at my kids. for example. This is horrible now in retrospect. But at the time I didn't know. And as I woke up to what was happening in that process, as I became more intimate with that kind of, my own vigorous being heading over in that direction of just, what are you doing? Like that kind of thing. I could start feeling the pain in myself that was wrapped up in that whole process. It wasn't only the pain that I inflicted on them or the kind of way that now, them being dominated by that kind of action. I could also feel my own contraction and my own pain in that situation. Right? So as I become more intimate with it, then I can figure, okay, how am I going to approach things in a different way? Right? I think in your case, you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's kind of from the opposite place, from being dominated. Right? So what kind of intimacy can you allow with that fear that allows a different way to respond to it? How much are you walking around in fear when you don't need to be afraid in that situation, but because there's that pattern of fear of the domination, you continue to lock yourself in that circle, for example. And you can study that. And in the studying of that, and studying, I won't just mean intellectualizing it, right? I mean like becoming more intimate with it in your body, in your breath, in your heart. Some healing can happen there. So although that kind of domination is really, we're just so prone to it as humans, that we're all wounded by it in different ways. But when we recognize the wound, it gives us an opportunity to work on the healing. Mm-hmm. And here I'm using the word healing really purposely, not fixing. Mm-hmm. Right? Healing. And the healing can only happen through the deeper receptivity, where fixing can be like, oh, how am I going to make myself, I don't want to be a person who's like that anymore. I'm going to do this, 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 and this. I'm going to make myself be that way. Kind of replicates the problem. Yeah. There may be some strategies we need to implement. So I'm not saying that's not good. But the strategies will always have a poison. So recognize you have a poison and stay receptive.
Mm-hmm. I've been thinking last week about vigor, and last week you kind of talked about that it's a lot of this outward focus, outward. And you talked about these two streams, that there's this outward, but we also need to be kind of receiving. And I've been thinking about, I feel many times in my life, I've maybe had like an outward, inward, kind of like, I need to be improving my like self and my soul and my, and it is a kind of type of dominance. And so then I settled on the word, like thinking more in terms of land, about being fallow. That it's important to allow yourself to just kind of rest and whatnot. But then I wonder, well, like, am I letting myself be too fallow? Like, is it time for something to start growing or me to start instilling? But I think it's a little hard to find, to know when. And I appreciated what you were saying about, what are they called, the little animals, the little bugs?
Crawdads?
Crawdads, that maybe it's about just sitting with yourself and just letting whatever arise. But I do find it hard to know, like, well, this mix of knowing when to start cultivating, when to let it go, what should, like, when you say, like, be receptive, what are we looking for? Like, what is that receptivity?
So you're putting your finger right on the ungraspable pivot of effort. We can't know. Once we know, it will, in some very subtle way at least, become a kind of domination. Because the knowing will always be a one-sided activity. The kind of knowing, at least, that is, I have seen that it is this way, and so therefore I am going to do X, Y, or Z. So, so in that place of fallow, or that place, we could say Zazen is like that, where I don't do anything. I make a great effort in the direction of no effort. One teacher that I read, he said it's like a graph, and there's like effort and no effort on the axis, and you just make effort till it goes like straight up and down, and that's what we call no effort. It's not that we try to drop out the effort. We actually make the effort in the direction of no effort, which is it's a little tricky. You got to work with that. Yeah. So the fallow is not just like, oh, whatever, man. The going fallow is actually, I'm returning to the earth, which is full of latent energy. And that's what the going fallow is if you're a farmer, right? You know that you've got to rest the field sometimes so that energy rebalances. And they have ways of knowing what that is, which I don't. Cover crop, different things like that, right? So that returning to the earth is not going kind of like this. It's actually returning to this thing I can't grasp, which is whole, which is very difficult for us. Because usually when I have the plan, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. When you come back to that, it's not about knowing when is the right time to stop. It's just stay receptive, and there will be a sprout. And the sprout will not be your doing. Right? And that's a place where you're learning to trust something in a different way. Now you may want to bring water to the sprout. You want to make offerings. You want to cultivate it. But the cultivation comes from the recognition of a fundamental aliveness, as opposed to me trying to create the thing. And that's this is a very subtle terrain. But the great thing about Zazen is we study that very directly right when we sit down. I mean, you can just feel it from the first time you sit down and you're like, oh, I'm just sitting here. What am I supposed to do? Right? And maybe someone was kind and they gave you some instructions. You're like, okay, follow the breath. Kind of sidestep the question a little bit while you're doing that. But pretty soon you're going to get bored of following your breath, And then, okay, now what do I do? And so even though it's a very subtle question, meditation brings us very quickly, right to the gateway of that subtlety. Like, what am I doing? Which is the question of our whole life, right? What am I doing? And then the things that I really believe in, I want to keep doing them, but if I cut them off from those roots where they have just sprouted of their own, then it becomes I'm the subject, the project's the object. It ceases being alive in the way that it was originally. So that's what we're emphasizing, is to come back to those living roots, or I was saying living waters before, and let that be the buoyancy for what it is that you do. And you can feel that. I think when you come into an endeavor, like I know that you're an educator, and so like when you come into a classroom where that's the operating principle, I mean, just thinking about it makes me a little giddy. It's like that's the activating principle. And when you come into a classroom where it's like, we're going to cram this thing into these little twerps' heads and make sure it's locked and loaded, it feels really different. Now, I'm not saying there's never any reason to do that other kind of education. It's just mostly it seems like not the best way to go about it, right? And so and then you can feel that in a lot of different places, I feel that a lot when I'm going shopping, which I don't do that often. But like if you're in a place where you feel like, oh, the things I'm buying are actually in some way loved by the person who's organizing the store, something about that. And when you go to the place where it's just like, oh, what's gonna what's going to get the profit? How's it nailed down? Where's it fit on? Like that whole kind of thing. You can just kind of feel a different experience in those different situations. So I'm not saying that, never shop at Albertsons. I'm just saying I don't feel it as fulfilling, generally speaking, when I'm there in terms of the way the whole place is organized, the kind of that way that's organized. So we can bring an aliveness to that, even in those situations where it's kind of hardened. Well, what attitude do I bring to the apple here, even though I think maybe it's been slightly maligned on its journey to that particular place? Anyway, that was a lot. So next week, we'll talk about Zazen, which is the last of the 5 liberations, and we're talking about wisdom in each one of those. And so next week, talk about that, and then probably finish up the week after that. And then starting in September, we'll be talking more about feeding hungry ghosts and other things like that. So if you're able to come the next couple of weeks, that'll kind of round out. I think today was 10, so we'll do a clear dozen.